Good evening and welcome to Hello It's Us, a program based on the premise that life in general goes better if we're all working together as opposed to if it's you, me, and them all working at cross purposes. Hello It's Us is brought to you by a collaboration between the Extended Dream Foundation and Public Access Television Channel 18. I'm Terry Cunningham, one of the co-hosts. My partner on the far right, Keith Ruff.
Hello.
And with us tonight is our friend Jeff Lauer, Executive Director of the Brain Injury Alliance of Iowa. Welcome, Jeff.
Thank you, Terry. Good to see you, Keith.
Well,
Thank you.
And today we're here to talk about some of the fiscal issues that are being wrestled with in Des Moines, primarily related to the disability community and some to the elderly community. We're going to talk about the waiting list for the Medicaid waivers program and the what's called clawback that the state wants to do with county funding, and then we'll talk a little bit about lack of future meal service for the Meals on Wheels program. We've currently got 7,300 people on the Medicaid waiting list. Many of them have been there for multiple years.
Correct.
Last year, the legislature approved and appropriated $8.4 million to reduce those lists.
Even more, 8.7.
8.7?
Yep.
Okay. And the governor vetoed that.
The governor vetoed that money.
why?
Why? I think you'd have to ask Terry Branstad about why. I haven't gotten a direct answer from the governor, and you should know that the Brain Injury Alliance did ask. We have over 900 people who are on waiting lists as part of that 7,000 plus group. And we went into last session, we thought, communicating effectively, both with Democrats and Republicans in the House and the Senate, about the scope of need, and then the fact that last year, when the waiting list was about 4,000 people, that it was an unreasonably long list and an unreasonably long waiting period of somewhere between 16 to 18 months of a wait. And there are actually some legal implications. There is a Supreme Court decision from way back in 1999 called the Olmstead versus LC decision, which has been really clear across the country as setting a standard that states may not have unreasonably long waiting lists for people. Now, that question about what is reasonable, it's been answered. In many states, it's been shown that more than a year is not reasonable. Iowa seems to be skirting the civil rights and, frankly, ignoring the civil rights of those 7,000 people. But to answer the question, Keith, about why, the governor's aides stated that they believed that the services that were provided by these specialized disability service programs, the Medicaid waivers for people with brain injury, for children's mental health, for people with physical disabilities, they stated that they believed that they would be covered in the governor's new health and wellness program, which was affiliated and associated with the expansion of Medicaid and the Affordable Care Act, and they were just frankly wrong. And we actually even came and asked them, did you know this wasn't true? And they said, no, it is true. Fast forward a year, they understand that those services were not provided. But now, we're a year behind. We're $8.7 million behind, and we've doubled that list from what was only terribly unreasonable to terribly, horribly, amazingly unreasonable.
Absolutely. Yet, the thing that just kind of spits in the face of every person on that waiting list is there's no money allocated currently.
Well, that's actually changed in the last week. There has been a tremendous amount of advocacy, even perhaps by people watching here on local PATV, calls and emails to elected officials has made progress, truly. The conservative portion of the House, the Iowa House, has allocated, as of last Thursday night, $5.1 million in their budget, which they were saying all session long there was no money. Zero, nada, nothing here. So they put they started with 4.8. And then some mad mothers from the Trauma Mamas, Iowa Trauma Mamas, and the Parents Creating Change in consortium with the Brain Injury Alliance. We came to the State House a number of times, and frankly, there's not much more dangerous in this world than a mad mother. And they were in the face of the legislature explaining how their children were functionally trapped out of state in institutions because they were on this waiting list for a waiver, and the state was paying far more than they'd have to pay in-state for services. Mm-hmm. The medical professionals who'd been treating these children with mental health needs had declared these kids are ready to go home. They need to go home, but they can't come home because they don't have any community-based services available, so they're stuck out of state. So it's the right thing medically, it's the right thing financially, and it's the right thing morally. But again, the waiver waiting list precludes that. So the House heard that, and they put some money on the table. As of this morning, and this is, what are we at, Wednesday?
Yes.
Yeah.
Wednesday, April
16th.
Thank you, 16th. The Senate Health and Human Services Appropriations Subcommittee and the Senate itself have approved $7.1 million to kind of come in to negotiate with the House. And so likely there'll be some monies between $5 and $7 million. And that's not bad news, that's good news. Let's just say that's good news. Yeah. That'll take perhaps between 2,000 and 2,200 people off of the 4 waiver waiting lists that are out there. Yet, we're still left kind of, if you will, if you talk about that we didn't make payments on a loan last year, mm-hmm. We've got a principal that's now so high that we're only paying interest. So with 5,000 people left on that waiting list, it is still clearly an unconstitutional violation of many of those people's civil rights to have to wait 2 years for services. So I guess it's a good news, bad news scenario. I talked to a mother just this morning who said, wow, you know, it's really great that there's some movement, but it's not going to affect my family. We're 831 on the children's mental health waiting list. And another mother I talked to, actually it was a mother and a sister yesterday, who said, you know, they're so far down the waiting list, they're not going to get services. They're happy that somebody's going to get services, but they're also recognizing that services not provided are functionally telling people, no, you don't deserve and you won't get the necessary treatment that you need. And so 2 years of a kid's life spent in an institution that doesn't need to be there, that changes the trajectory of a lifetime forever. It's not recoverable.
Sure.
2 years of a person with a brain injury who is trying to figure out how to readapt in their community or to avoid ending up in a nursing home, a prison, a homeless shelter, or worse. 2 years of trying to live on their own and figure this out without the necessary specialized brain injury treatment and services is 2 years that just sets up a lifetime of expense, both fiscal and social.
Well, and I think we need to make clear that not all of the folks on the waiting list are sitting in an institution waiting.
That's correct.
A lot of these are people who are home with the family, which in itself creates a multitude of issues, because you probably have to have one of the parents at home with the child.
Right.
You have then the added financial burden, unless parents can manage to work off shifts, of that on the family.
Right.
You have the whole social entity of the family, because any other siblings are not getting attention that they deserve.
Right.
And you know, many of them understand that the other sibling needs more attention, but it's hard to always get left behind or
Right.
not be able to do this because, Bobby needs this or Bobby can't go to that
Right.
or, so that sets up things which increases the stress level
Yeah.
that everybody in the family is going through.
Yeah.
So let's use an example. I'm going to change some names, but there's a family, we'll call them the Jensens, and they're a husband and wife, and they have 3 children, one of whom had a brain injury as a result of a series of sports incidents, one ending up on a playground. But this is a kid now that has significant cognitive and emotional changes as a result of this. The Jensens aren't going to let this child go into an institution. That's just not who they are. That's not how many Iowans will. I mean, we will do a lot to keep our kids at home. In fact, most parents, I think, would. The consequence of keeping this kid home is that the adult who's home, and there's only one who can be home at a time because they do work separate shifts, there's always an adult home there, they're focusing their attention on this kid who needs that attention, and they're not focusing on these other 2 kids that are starting to have other issues going on. But at the same time, their economic situation has changed, and the quality of their life. The fact is that this child would qualify for an out-of-state placement if they would so want, but they don't want that. What they would be so much better off with is some respite services in-home and for some behavioral supports from some specialty staff from a community service agency to help give them some ideas about how to change the environment in the home to better adapt and better support all of them. And very few of us are experts in issues of mental health or brain injury or cognitive disabilities, but we do have them out there in Iowa. Not everybody can pay cash on the barrelhead to get access to that.
Well, and it's unfortunate to say that because Iowans are compassionate, because Iowa families don't want to send their kids off someplace else,
Right.
the legislature and the governor is hanging their hat on that.
We do.
And,
we balance. We
you
not only
know,
balance
they
our budget,
can-
we're saving money.
Yeah. And if, it's easy to figure the number out, if all of those people who are currently at home with families were being served by waivers as they ought to, what would that difference make in the economy?
It'd be pretty significant. We pulled down. I think I heard from one of the senators last week. It's 2 to 1 in terms of dollars, federal dollars that come in for the dollars we put on. I think that we've got a legislature that is maybe is somewhat out of touch with the realities of living in these situations, of people living with disabilities. Advocacy has made a difference, and in terms of people who might be watching of this in the evening, one thing that I would absolutely, and I think that all 3 of us would encourage you to do, is to call your local representative, to the House or the Senate. And it doesn't have to be a specialized statement, but just saying, please support services for people with disabilities, for children, for families with children with mental health needs. Just one call makes a difference because our legislators do some math and they figure for every one person that calls or contacts them, there's another 100 or 200 people out there that are too shy or just wouldn't do it. So that can make a huge difference. And that's what's made the difference to get, if you will, that $5 to $7 million on the table right now. But there's going to have to be some pretty aggressive advocacy over the next few months to really make a difference in this issue. This Medicaid waiver waiting list it's a clear violation of people's civil rights, and that in and of itself, Terry, is, as you know, and both you and Keith know, is something that people with disabilities and advocates with people with disabilities can't really let go unaddressed for very long. Otherwise, it becomes the new normal, and the rights that we can't. If we ignore it, it'll become the new normal. And people will just assume, well, we don't have to follow the law.
Yeah, and I mean, we have seen some of that with the ADA.
Right.
Yeah.
The ADA is celebrating its 24th anniversary this year.
Yeah.
And there's still stuff that hasn't come into compliance. And some of the pushback we're having on that is, Well, it's been almost 24 years. Why are you pushing for it now? You know, do we really need to do this, that, or the other thing? You know,
Right.
you've lived without it for this
Right,
long.
right.
Why make a fuss now?
Right. I was encouraged to, here in Iowa City, to see recently the city park pool renovations that are happening this year. And they are finally coming into compliance with the ADA. But what that'll also mean is that the pool will be much more accessible, comfortable, and friendly for everybody, including our seniors who might benefit from a that zero slope access. You know, this is for all people, not just people with obvious physical disabilities or young people with, I mean, this is about making our communities available and accessible and appropriate.
And it's going to be so cool. Last fall, they had a couple nights of open houses at the pool.
Oh,
So I tootled over and looked
Sure.
at what the pool was,
Sure.
and how it was all set up, and they kind of explained what they were going to do, and that they were going to move fences
Mm-hmm.
out and incorporate some of the trees that are there with it, and then they had a public hearing.
Hmm.
Well, there was probably 11 of us at the public hearing.
okay.
And 3 of us had visible disabilities.
Mm-hmm.
So we went through and we got to put a fair amount of input in.
Nice.
Because the public of Iowa City was 11 people that night.
That night.
And one of the comments that I made for the different designs they had was the one with the fence weaving through the trees and
Ah.
that was the one that kind of gave me the warm fuzzy feeling. Like, this is right. This is going to be cool. And, for so many things, folks have to show up.
Yep.
Yeah.
And it doesn't take a whole lot of
No.
people to show up.
No,
But,
Because not many of anybody shows up.
No.
But if you show up,
Right.
you get to speak your piece.
right. No, both of you have had that history. I mean, I've seen you show up so many different times to have a huge impact, and anybody can do that. Truly, anybody who has
Absolutely.
the interest in making a difference in this community on almost any topic can show up and make a difference. Now, maybe not as big a difference as you'd hope for or as quickly as you'd hope for, but the differences happen. There's that other issue we were going to talk about tonight about the issue of the state trying to, I think you mentioned earlier, claw back some monies that the counties and the regions might be saving. And I wondered if you wanted to,
Theoretically, yeah. The method of funding the Mental Health and Disability Services Committee and populations in Iowa, as you guys know, have changed over the last couple years, rather.
probably the last couple of days too.
Yeah, really. It's gone from a county-funded system to a state-funded system. And I want to make clear, that's the biggest misnomer that there's ever been. The funding for the system hasn't changed at all. It's just that instead of the state now, or the county now sending all the tax revenue to the state and having it come back to them, they used to get to keep part of it.
Right.
So now with it going from county by county to regions and money from everybody getting put into the pot, what the state has said is that any money that a county's saving due to that or Medicaid expansion, they need to send 80% of that money back to the state.
For property tax relief.
Yeah. Well, the problem with that is the system hasn't operated yet.
No.
So how do you know what savings are going to be if you haven't spent money on it yet?
I think you're assuming that there should be a logic or a rationale
know.
to some of these programs, Terry.
I
the-
hope not to confuse any legislators that may be watching.
Fair enough.
But what's not included in the new systems are what were always called enhanced services.
Right.
There are the core services or the mandatory services,
Basic
whatever
services.
it needs to be
Right.
called, that everybody's supposed to be entitled to.
Right.
And then counties, on their own, were able to expand services
Right.
if they wanted to, and then they were paying for them,
Right.
basically.
And many counties did.
Yeah.
yeah,
Well, that's what, when all this first started, counties were kind of excited about it because, oh, there's going to be this pot of money to be able to expand services.
It was-
Well, you know,
Yeah, it was really the promise on the front end by
Yeah.
the legislators in the Department of Human Services that really all advocates stepped up to the table based on the premise that there would at least be no less, and that there would almost certainly be more funding available. And you know, the struggle with that we have is that the policies that get created drive the funding. The funding drives the services. And the data that we'd like to have on what works and what doesn't work is not collected that much, not that well. So we don't have
Yeah.
great data to be able to drive policy. That said, we're not clear, I think, yet about this, what the state likes to call the offset. That's the soft word. I think the advocates here are calling it the clawback. They're clawing back the money that might be saved. The big issue, some of the big issues are not only those enhanced services, but there is no funding required to serve people in Iowa with developmental disabilities or with brain injuries. That's not a requirement. Those monies, the way the law reads is that those services can be provided or could be provided if and when the services for other groups, meaning people with intellectual disabilities and mental health issues, are fully funded and fully taken care of, which we all know there is no such thing as meeting all the needs. We're never going to have enough to meet all the needs. But overall, Terry, this speaks to, I think, there's the facts of all the matters that people can listen to when they hear policy wonks like you and Keith and I talk. And then there's, I think, a deeper issue that goes on in our community and across the state, where we're getting a little bit more hard-hearted, if we're not careful, to the realities of living with less. And frankly, the difference between people having their needs met and their wants met. We have more and more people in our community and across the state who are facing food insecurity, be they elderly or children who don't have access to regular meals. We have people who are supporting some really very difficult family members with either disabilities or health issues, and in extraordinary ways that if they were our neighbors, we would really want them to have services and supports. But since we don't know them, we don't know it's kind of out of sight, out of mind. And we're spending time in our virtual world, so maybe we don't see that as much. But what I think that people can do is recognize that if your needs are met here in Iowa City, in Coralville, and Johnson County, across the state, there is a huge need for support for our community nonprofits that are providing efficient, effective, accessible services because the state's not doing it. The state is no longer providing the kinds of services and supports to people with disabilities, to people who are homeless, to people who have other kinds of needs and insecurities that we have. And so that's kind of the new normal, is that our state government is assuming that the people who are watching this and you and I are going to step in. And
we can only step in so far.
I totally agree with you.
Well, we've come to an end of our time for this session. Want to thank you very much. We'll definitely have to do another one here.
Goes quick. I really appreciate being here.
Okay. Thanks, Keith.
You're
Thanks,
welcome.
everybody out there. Join us again the next time for some more of this information. I'd say all of it, but we don't have the studio for that long. Take care.
Have a good week.
Bye-bye.